Cool. So, welcome back everybody for the second talk of the day. I hope you've recovered from the first. I know there was a lot of information in there. This isn't going to be any lighter realistically. There's a lot of information that's going to be coming your way, and trying to get you to start understanding when we start talking about politics, when we start talking about the management of people, customs, beliefs, history, and start looking forward about the environment and how people behave in different places, not just on the African continent, but also in the diaspora. We need to start understanding that there's a different psychology, there's a different mentality that exists in both areas. So who I want to introduce you to is a lady that I met, I want to say, 3 years ago? 3, 4 years?
Longer than that.
Okay, my bad.
maybe 5 years ago, maybe.
5 years ago. She was, oh crap, yeah, it was it was a while. Where we were discussing the relationship between the diaspora and the continent, and understanding how the connection can sometimes be at different levels or at different tiers. And the sense of obligation came in terms of how do people relate? What does it mean? Is it a holiday space? Is it the idea of returning home? What impact do you have when you go home? And within that, we also we also featured in the Victoria and Albert Museum, where it was Ghana's in 60th year of independence, and discussing in terms of how far it's come, what are the people viewing the nation like, and how do they feel away from it and celebrating its ideals and its progress. And what you'll find is that every nation is evolving, as they like to say, but how far are they evolving and are they moving forward? So very much similar to when we had a talk with Robin Walker that talks about the different sets of policies that existed in different communities and different spaces. How far have we come? Where are we going? And how well rooted and embedded are they into those civilizations? So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Kirstie Kwarteng, who is currently studying her PhD at SOAS, but is probably going to drop a lot of bombs of knowledge in this presentation. All right, Kirstie, over to you.
Great, thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. Like Chris said, I'm a PhD student at SOAS, and I'm in the Department of Development Studies. And my dissertation is looking at second-generation Ghanaians in London and New York City and how they maintain their connection to Ghana. And by second gen, I mean the children of Ghanaian immigrants. So in that vein today, we are going to interrogate diaspora. We are going to unpack what diaspora means in the Ghanaian context. And we're also going to see how Ghana is trying to use its diaspora to aid in its national development. Oh, let's see. Okay. So a quick overview of today's session. We are going to begin by exploring the term diaspora and the history of the word and the Ghanaian government definition of diaspora as well. And then we'll move into Pan-Africanism and how Ghana's first president used his Pan-African ideology to try to turn Ghana into a Pan-African state. And then we'll move into Ghana's migration history and some of Ghana's migration policies, because if we're talking about diaspora, we need to understand how it was formed and what policies currently exist in Ghana regarding the diaspora. And then we'll conclude with a brief analysis of the Year of Return, which for those of you who may not be familiar with that, it was a Ghanaian government initiative that was geared towards the diaspora that took place in 2019. And I will be asking you all some questions throughout the session, and they're not rhetorical. I do want you to answer. So the first question is, have you heard of this term before? In what context? What is your understanding of the word diaspora?
Feel free to come off mute and just go at it.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
So diaspora is a section of people originating from a different country, living in another country. Like we have the Indian diaspora in England, or the Pakistani diaspora in Bradford. So there's a different community living, different members of country living in a different country, not their original country, the one they were born, like their parents or grandparents or they originated from, but living in a different country as people of that country.
Excellent. Does anyone else have any ideas on what diaspora is?
I try. I would take from what Anania said and maybe complete with the idea that these people that migrate or that have generations after this migration make efforts to also continue a culture and a heritage. So forms a certain kind of coherent cultural group also outside of the place where they migrated from.
Excellent. Thank you both. So as you can see, even in this group, we're not a lot, but there's already kind of, different conceptualizations of the term. And that makes sense because even within academic spaces, the term is what we call contested, which just pretty much means that different people have different definitions of the term. And it's a Greek word actually, and it comes from the Greek words that mean to sow and over. And it was initially used in regards to the Jewish experience of them being expelled from their homeland. However, the world has changed, and there are now a lot of people permanently living outside of their countries of origin. And so with that, the definition of the term needed to evolve and change a bit. So in the 1990s, in the academic space, this is where we first saw the first attempts to try to move the term beyond the Jewish experience and to redefine it for the modern era by applying it to other groups. And there were two works that were created in the 90s that are now considered to be the seminal works of diaspora studies. And the first one was written by William Schaefer, and there was a journal article called Diasporas in Modern Societies, Myths of Homeland and Return. And the other was a book by Robin Cohen called Global Diasporas, an Introduction. Now, these two authors argued that in order for a group to be considered a diaspora, they had to have certain characteristics. And that included being dispersed from a homeland to two or more foreign regions. And the dispersal, can be traumatic, but for them, they didn't think that it always had to be traumatic for the group to be considered a diaspora. Maintaining a collective memory or myth about their homeland, sustaining a strong collective community consciousness that is used to maintain a connection to the homeland, difficulty being accepted into their host societies, and creating a return narrative or movement. Now, not everybody agrees with these criteria. Some say something should be added or things removed, or they have their own, this completely different conceptualization of diaspora, which is fine because, as I said, it is a contested term. But this, list wasn't meant to be like the be-all, end-all, definition of what it means for a group to be a diaspora. It was just at the time it was created, it was, a new framework, and it was meant to give people another way of thinking about diaspora when people at the time, or academia at the time, really wasn't associating the term with anything that wasn't related to the Jewish experience. So that definition was, like I said, the basis of a lot of diaspora definitions and discussions within the academic space. But I know that there's sometimes a difference or even a disconnect between what exists in academia and what exists in the lived experiences of people. And so in my personal experience as a person from a diaspora community myself, as well as in my professional academic experience working with diaspora groups, I've seen, the disconnect that can exist. Because, for example, when I started, I said my dissertation is on second generation Ghanaians. And now that I'm working on my dissertation, it's, I just kind of have to use academic lingo. So in the academic space, the children of immigrants are called second generation. But in conversations I've had with my friends and things I've seen on social media, in the non-academic world, people tend to use first generation when discussing the children of immigrants. And in academia, that term is referred to for the immigrants themselves. So I don't think there's, one is not, better than the other or anything like that. It's just, an example of the disconnect that can exist between academic and non-academic spaces. Additionally, there can be differences in how different diaspora groups define themselves as diaspora. The Ghanaian government now is using the term diaspora a lot more when they are talking about Ghanaian immigrants and their descendants living abroad. And so because of that, Ghanaian people outside of Ghana are starting to use the term diaspora more. But I know in other countries, they might not use diaspora. I know, for example, in Nepal, the Nepali government, they don't really use the term diaspora. They use Nepalis living abroad. So in trying to do research on that group, when I was typing Nepali diaspora, I wasn't getting as much as when I would type Nepalis living abroad. So that's just an example of, again, differences between different diaspora groups. But then there can also be differences within diasporas themselves. For example, when I was, I'm currently in the States because of COVID, but back when I was still in London, I was getting my hair done. And the woman that was doing my hair was Ghanaian. And I think at first she thought I was African-American because of my accent, but then I told her, oh, like I was born in the US, but my parents are from Ghana. I'm like, my whole family is still over there. And she said, oh, so you're one of the diasporans. And I thought to myself, that was really interesting that she placed me as being a diasporan because I was born and raised abroad. Even though both of us are Ghanaian outside of Ghana, she did not see herself as being in the diaspora. She, I guess, just felt that she was a Ghanaian who happened to be living abroad. So as you can see, the term diaspora is, it's contested between academia and non-academic spaces, but also within diasporas themselves, there can be some differences. Now, in the past 10 to 20 years, there's been an increase in government interest in diaspora, both in the nations that diasporas, the migrants move to, which are sometimes called host nations, as well as from their countries of origin or their homelands. Does anyone have any idea why there's been, like in the past 10 to 20 years, there's been an interest from governments in diasporas and diaspora populations? You can just guess.
My first guess is money.
Yep. That is exactly right. So the money that diaspora groups are sending to their homelands are called remittances. And global remittance outflows it's a lot of money. In 2019, the official count, so this means like the money that they could track through Western Union, World Remit, and things like that. So the official count was $551 billion, according to the World Bank. That number is probably like actually much higher in reality because, because money is, sent to countries informally. So if I'm going to Ghana and my friend is like, oh, like, here's some money, can you give this to my grandma? Like that's remittances entering the country, but they're not being tracked because they're not sending it, it's not being sent in a way that's trackable. So this number, and remittances generally tend to outpace the amount of foreign aid and foreign direct investment combined. So that's the main reason why governments are becoming more interested in remittances. And so throughout this session, you'll probably hear me say like harnessing, because that's for whatever reason, that's the word that in the development space people like to use when they talk about remittances, like harnessing remittances for development. I don't know why they say that, that's just what it is. And so remittances to Ghana specifically in 2019 were $3.5 billion US dollars, and that's actually the second highest amount in Africa. But unfortunately with COVID, everything is being impacted, including remittances. So from what the reports are showing, it seems like the amount of remittances that's being sent to homelands is decreasing worldwide. And so it's still kind of early to tell to see like what the impact of that will be. So we'll just kind of have to wait and see. So I've given you a bit about, the academic definitions and how they can differ from how, people themselves diasporas themselves define themselves. But I also just wanted to show how the Ghanaian government defines diaspora, since we're really focusing on Ghana today. So this definition was taken from the diaspora engagement policy. And so we'll actually come back to this definition later on, but I just wanted to share it. So they define the diaspora as Ghanaians who have migrated and are resident outside of Ghana, Ghanaians born to Ghanaian parents living outside Ghana, described as the second and third generations, the youth who migrated from Ghana or abroad, descendants of enslaved Africans, and all persons of African descent who have historical and cultural ties with Ghana and also have interest in Ghana's development. So as you can see, Ghana's definition of diaspora isn't only limited to people who can directly trace their lineage to Ghana, whether the immigrants or the parents or grandparents or immigrants. You can see that it's pretty much open to anyone in the world who is of African descent. And the main reason for that is Pan-Africanism. Ghana has long been associated with Pan-Africanism and Pan-African ideologies, and we will get into why that is. So this definition of Pan-Africanism is was from a journal article written by Mohamed Bolaji, who is a professor at the University of Development Studies in Ghana. And he wrote a journal article about Pan-Africanism in the 21st century and Ghana's place in that. And so he defines Pan-Africanism as the idea which had resulted in, I'm sorry. Okay, so the idea that is not correct, but Pan-Africanism is the idea that seeks the unification of all people of African descent in an attempt to initiate collective actions towards their emancipation from the unending ills of the European slave trade, colonialism, and neocolonialism, and their embarkation on social development that brings self-reliance and dignity to them. So I'd like to say in its like simplest form, or the simplest definition of Pan-Africanism, is that it's an ideology that promotes the political, social, and cultural unification of people of African descent. So this includes people on the continent, yes, but as well as people of African descent outside of the continent, and that whether they were forcibly removed from the continent or they left of their own accord, I think they were born to, immigrants, African immigrants outside of the continent, or even within the continent, honestly. Pan-Africanism seeks to unite all people of African descent everywhere for their liberation. So the first Pan-African Congress was held in 1900 in London, and it was organized by a man from Trinidad named Henry Sylvester Williams. And the 50 people attended from Africa, the Caribbean, and the US. And the aims of the first conference included African unity, of course, and seeing what they could do to improve the conditions of people on the continent. And since that first Pan-African Congress in 1900, there have since been 8 more, with the most recent one being held in 2014 in South Africa. But historians feel like the one that happened in 1945 is the most significant. And for what we will be discussing today, that one is also the most significant. So the one that was held in 1945 was held in Manchester, and it was held a few months after World War II had ended. And a lot of African and Caribbean people from the colonies had to fight in World War II for the colonial powers that were controlling them at the time. And so the consensus after this conference was that these colonies were due independence. And another reason why this conference was important was because some of the people that attended went on to become the future leaders of different African colonies. So Hastings Banda was there, and he went on to become the first president of Malawi. Jomo Kenyatta was there. He went on to become the first president of Kenya. We also had W.E.B. Du Bois that was there from the United States. He was the head of the NAACP, which is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, that was in the US. And the wife of Marcus Garvey was also there, Amy Ashwood Garvey. But there was also a young man that was in attendance who was actually one of the conference organizers, and his name was Kwame Nkrumah. And when people talk about Pan-Africanism and great Pan-African thinkers, he more often than not is on the list. He studied in the United States, first at a historically Black college in Pennsylvania called Lincoln University. And then he went on to New York, I think Columbia, to further his studies. And being a Black man in the United States in the 1940s, he was exposed to racism, of course, but he was also exposed to the Pan-African ideas of Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, George Padmore, and several others. And after he finished his schooling in the United States, he went to London for 2 years, and that's where he was able to get involved in the Pan-African movement there and help plan the Pan-African Congress that was there. And so after his time in London, he went back to the Gold Coast, as it was called at the time, and joined the independence movement there, and eventually became Ghana's first president. And being the Pan-Africanist that he was very passionate about African unity, and he really wanted to create a United States of Africa. And so he didn't feel that, Ghana being independent was, that was cool, but he didn't really feel like anyone was free until everybody was free. So this is a very popular quote of his: "Our independence is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of Africa." And so Ghana, because of him, Ghana became what I kind of call a Pan-African Mecca. Ghana became an independent nation on March 6th, 1957. And it was the first sub-Saharan British African country to get its independence. And I put sub-Saharan in quotes because when people say sub-Saharan, they really mean Black. So it was the first, it's true, it was the first Black African British colony to get its independence. And it was, at the time, it was really viewed as like a symbol of like Black liberation and African freedom. And because, in 1957, people of African descent all over the world were really fighting for their political freedom. It was the beginning of the civil rights movement in the United States, as well as the independence movements of the colonies in the Caribbean and in Africa. So Ghana's independence was viewed as like a beacon of hope. It's like, they got it, okay, like we too can also get it. And of course, Nkrumah, being the Pan-Africanist that he was, he invited people from all over the African diaspora to come visit Ghana, to come live in Ghana and help build a new nation. And people came. Martin Luther King Jr. And his wife, they came to Ghana during the independence celebrations. Malcolm X came to Ghana as well to visit. Maya Angelou lived in Ghana for a bit. She worked at the University of Ghana. W.E.B. Du Bois and his wife Shirley ended up moving to Ghana in the early 1960s. The art historian Sylvia Boone lived in Ghana. So people were really coming and trying to live in Ghana and help build a new nation as Nkrumah wanted. Another reason why people were, I would say, kind of invested in Ghana as a nation state is because of its role in the transatlantic slave trade. During the transatlantic slave trade, roughly 1.2 million people were taken from Ghana and forcibly sent to different parts of the world, including the Caribbean and North and South America. So there's people, they might not be able to directly trace their heritage to Ghana back just 1 or 2 generations, but there's a lot of people around the world who have ancestry in Ghana. So at the time, I think that's another reason why people felt an affinity to Ghana. And also today, I think that affinity is growing because of the things like the ancestry DNA and things like that. So as I said, Nkrumah was staunch Pan-Africanist, and he really wanted to see a united Africa. And so during this time, other African nations were getting their independence, and Nkrumah was supporting them. There were freedom fighters who were able to make their base in Ghana. He even offered to send the Ghana police band to Malawi to help with their celebrations for independence. So he was really, trying to do what he could to support the other African nations that were getting their independence. And so with that, he became one of the founding members of the Organization of African Unity, which was founded in 1963 in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. But we now know it as the African Union. It became the AU in 2002. And the OAU was created to be a self-governing body for the continent to help promote independence and sovereignty for Africa and its people. Okay. So I don't know if everyone is seeing how I'm saying, but on the top left, there should be like a placard that says president. So that in that picture, that's Kwame Nkrumah, Haile Selassie, who was the emperor of Ethiopia at the time. And I'm not sure who that the woman is in the picture, but this was at the opening of the Organization of African Unity. And to the right of that is MLK and Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana. This was during Ghana's independence celebrations. And then at the bottom right is Malcolm X and Maya Angelou when they were both in Ghana. And the last picture is Kwame Nkrumah and his wife Fatia Nkrumah, who was actually from Egypt, with W.E.B. Du Bois, and that was also taken in Ghana. So you can see just some pictures of some of the things that have been discussed so far. Yes. So now that we've kind of discussed some of that background, I think it's good to get into some more of the policies in Ghana's migration history. But I want to begin with just some migration statistics. I wasn't able to find a map of migration like stats in Ghana, but this is just a map of Ghana showing all 16 regions. This is actually a fairly new map because Ghana, up until December 2018, had 10 regions, but there was a referendum held and some of the people in some of the larger regions decided to split and have their own region. So now Ghana has 16 regions. So the number of immigrants coming into Ghana, I believe this is as of 2017, was 431,000, and that includes migrants, which are the chunk of that at 417,000. Refugees, which are 12,100, and asylum seekers, which are over 1,300 people that are coming in. Now most people that are coming into Ghana are from ECOWAS countries, and ECOWAS is the Economic Community of West African States that was established in 1975. And the president of Ghana is actually the current head of ECOWAS. Now the number of immigrants, people leaving Ghana, are 874,000. Does anyone just take a wild guess the most popular destination country for people leaving Ghana?
Feel free to put it in the chat.
Oops. Okay, let's see.
Someone said Sudan.
Sudan, not Sudan.
This is a test of everyone's geography. How many countries do you know? Do you want to give a hint before they? Which picking continent?
Pardon?
Which continent are they guessing on?
Oh, repeat the question. So it's which country is the most popular destination for people leaving Ghana? Like which country are the most Ghanaian migrants going to? England? Not quite. It's not as far away from Ghana as you think. I'll take one more guess.
I have no idea.
No, okay. Okay, maybe I'll just get the answer. It's like, yeah, it's still in Africa. It's Nigeria.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So Nigeria is actually the main country of choice for Ghanaians that are emigrating, followed by the U.S., UK, Togo, and Italy. And remittances from Ghana are actually, remittances from Nigeria are actually, according to the World Bank, the second highest out of like all the nations that are, sending money to Ghana. The first is the US, then Nigeria, and then the UK. So I guess learning new things. So that's good. So Ghana's migration history. Ghana has a lot of, there's people coming out, people coming in, but because we're talking about diaspora, we will just be focusing on things related to immigration. So there are 4 periods of immigration by people who study Ghanaian migration history. The first one is the period of minimal immigration. Then is the period of initial immigration, and the phase of large-scale immigration, and then the period of intensification and diasporization of Ghanaians, which is the period that we're currently in today. So, and when I talk about like immigration, I'm not talking about people who were, forced to go. This is people who were, who left of their own accord. So the period of minimal immigration from, colonial times up until Ghana's independence and into the early 1960s, people really weren't leaving the Gold Coast or Ghana like that because things were, relatively speaking, okay. Like they could get jobs if they needed them. If people were leaving, they were going to other English-speaking countries in the West for school. And then they would come back to Ghana. People really weren't leaving to stay. But in the next period, the period of initial immigration, this is when we start to see people slowly begin to leave Ghana. And this started after 1965. So in 1966, Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown in a coup, and that of course caused a lot of economic and political instability. So people started leaving, and they were going mainly to other African countries. There were still people like going abroad for school and that, but at this time, people who were leaving to leave permanently were going to other African countries. Then the next phase is the phase of large scale immigration. And this is really where we start to see people leave Ghana in large numbers. And this started in the late 70s and early 80s. There were, again, more coups, so that meant more political instability. There were shortages of basic items. It was hard to get food. There was famine. And there was lots of uncertainty. So again, people were leaving. They were going still mainly to other African countries, but this is also when we see Nigeria start to become the country of choice for Ghanaian migrants. Even people in my family are also, spent some time in Nigeria during this time. Things in Nigeria were going well because of the oil. So people were going because there were just more economic opportunities there at the time than there were in Ghana. So people, and also other African nations were getting their independence at the time. And so in the same way that Kwame Nkrumah asked people to come to Ghana, those nations were also needing people to come and, help build the nation. So people were going. And also by this time, ECOWAS had been formed. And so because of that, moving around West Africa was also easier. So the last period, this is the period where we really see a lot of people leaving. And this is really where, this is the period that the Ghanaian diaspora, as we see it today, was formed. So things like, things are, again, like they're not great. They were still famine. In addition, the IMF and World Bank had instituted structural adjustment policies in Ghana, and that significantly cut down the public sector. And so jobs were lost. There weren't a whole lot of government-related jobs, and also government services were cut as well because of that. So things like healthcare, transportation, education were all cut. In addition, Nigeria, which, like I said, was the main option for people leaving Ghana at the time, decided they didn't want the Ghanaians coming anymore, and they kicked them all out, and that's commonly referred to as Ghana must go. So since Ghana wasn't really an option for people, Nigeria wasn't an option anymore, people started going west. So this is where we see people going to the US, we see people going to Canada, the UK, Netherlands, Germany. So that's the reason why there's Ghanaians in Western countries now, is because of the events that happened in this period. So Ghana's migration policies, the National Migration Policy lists 18 laws and policies that currently exist in Ghana around migration. But these are the ones that exist that have portions, at least, that are related to the diaspora. So the 1992 Constitution, this was the constitution that was created in 92 when Ghana returned to a democratic rule after the coups and things. They were like ruled by different military leaders for about 20 years. So in 92, since they were going back to being a democracy, they created a constitution, and this constitution granted citizenship by birth and marriage, and it was then amended in 1996 to grant dual citizenship. And then the Citizenship Act, which was passed in 2000, grant citizenship by birth, naturalization, or registration. And we have ROPA, which stands for Representation of the People Amendment Act, which was passed in 2006. And this is, I don't want to say it's controversial, but it allows Ghanaians living abroad, like that's the terminology that it used. It allows Ghanaians living abroad to vote, but it has not yet been implemented, which is a serious source of contention for some people in the diaspora. Like people have taken it to Ghana Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has said that the Electoral Commission needs to actually implement this, but this is like for years, like, nothing since 2006. And we're still, people are still waiting for the infrastructure to be available for Ghanaians abroad to vote. Additionally, Ghanaians abroad who have dual citizenship actually cannot hold public office in Ghana. So, which is also another source of contention. But what some people have done is if they are abroad, they don't get citizenship of the nation that they're in. They just maintain their Ghanaian citizenship and go back and run for office. Or, which has also happened, people who have dual citizenship, they revoke their other citizenship and just have Ghanaian citizenship so they can hold office in Ghana. And the last national migration policy that's related to diaspora is the right of abode. And this is another one that's on paper, but isn't really, it's difficult to actually get. So this was passed in 2000, and it allows, theoretically, anyone of African descent to apply and be granted the right to stay in Ghana indefinitely. But being in Ghana last year for my doing work for my dissertation and talking with people, I learned that it's actually very elusive to get. So far, I think the only person that has gotten it is Rita Marley, but of course, like it's in the benefit of the Ghanaian government to give Rita Marley right of abode. But for everyone else from the African diaspora that has moved to Ghana hoping to get it, like they found that it's not really as easy to get as it's made, that it's made to seem that it's easy to get. So they just kind of, hope that they can get citizenship, which is also not as easy to get, but we will also get into that. So there's 3 government bodies that are related to migration in Ghana. That's the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Interior, and the Diaspora Affairs Office. Ooh, okay. So these are the main policy issues that exist in Ghana regarding migration. So we have diverse mobilities, irregular migration, and diaspora engagement. And by diverse mobilities, I mean, there's a lot of different types of migration that are happening in Ghana. There's, internal migration, people moving, throughout the country, international migration, people coming to Ghana from different countries. There's emigration, people leaving Ghana for other countries, and return migration, the people that left coming back home. There's also refugee populations, because Ghana has a good number of refugee camps there. And then there's also nomadic communities as well who are also moving through Ghana during different times in the year. So these are all the things that the Ghanaian government has to juggle when they're thinking about migration. There's also irregular migration. In the news and media, you will probably hear this term as illegal migration, but I really don't like to use that. So I use the term irregular migration. And that is when people are pretty much in a country that without the proper documentation. So that means they could have had a visa to enter at one point in time and the visa expired and they just stayed, or they've been able to make their way into the country without any type of documentation. And unfortunately, this can also include human trafficking and smuggling. And that's actually becoming a big issue in Ghana, especially in regards to human trafficking for sex work and domestic work. Now, for diaspora engagement, there is, in the national migration policy, they give a different definition of diasporas. It's a bit more general. They just define it as individuals and members or networks, associations and communities who have left their country of origin, but maintain their links with their homeland. And we saw in the definition from the diaspora engagement policy that it's a bit different. And I've highlighted or bolded a certain area because it's going to be relevant for what we are talking about. Chris, am I good on time? I just want to make sure. Okay, cool. So yeah, so the migration policy, the national migration policy lists dual citizenship, harnessing remittances for development, there's that word, brain drain, brain gain, and brain waste as the main issues to tackle in regards to diaspora engagement. Now, the National Migration Policy, it talks a lot about using the diaspora to help with Ghanaian development through remittances, skills transfers, investment and trade. The language is very development oriented, which is why I think it's there in the diaspora, the diaspora engagement policy definition. You see this as, and also have an interest in Ghana's development. For Ghana, it's not just enough to be, of the diaspora in any sense. You also need to have an interest in being, wanting to develop Ghana in order for Ghana to see you as being part of the diaspora. And so at the time that the migration policy was created, and this was, I believe, in 2016, there was the Diaspora Affairs Bureau, which is housed at the Foreign Affairs Ministry, and also the Diaspora Support Unit. But now there is the Diaspora Affairs Office, which is housed at the Office of the President. And this was created when the new president, Nana Akufo-Addo, came into power in 2016. So with each, this is another issue with Ghana's diaspora engagement policies, is that there isn't, with each administration, things change. So there's an election coming up in Ghana this year in December, and if the current president is voted out, there's a chance that Ghana's diaspora engagement policy will, in definition even, will change again. And so the mission of the Diaspora Affairs Office at the Office of the President is to effectively harness, mobilize, and steer Ghanaian resources in the diaspora for political inclusion, economic and sociocultural development. So Ghana actually, like I said, they have a diaspora engagement policy, and that's a bit different from the migration policy because it talks about the African diaspora, cultural tourism, the second and third generations. It also does offer policy suggestions and strategies, but it hasn't yet been passed yet. I'm not, privy to the reasons why it hasn't been passed yet, but hopefully sometime in the future it'll make its way to Parliament. So we've talked a good bit about, we talked about diaspora, the history of the word, what it means in the Ghanaian context, how Pan-Africanism influences how the Ghanaian government defines diaspora. So let's actually take a look at Ghana's most recent Diaspora Affairs Initiative, the Year of Return. Has anyone actually heard about the Year of Return before just now? Oh, yes, Chris, I know you have. Okay, cool. So for those of you who don't know, the Year of Return was a government initiative created to, in their eyes, created to commemorate the 400th anniversary of the first enslaved Africans arriving in the United States. And Ghana's president in 2018 held an event in Washington, D.C. in September and, announced that, the year 2019 was the Year of Return and, everyone in the African diaspora can come home to Ghana. And then in December of 2018, the Full Circle Festival take place. And this was led by actor Boris Kodjoe and the Global Chief Marketing Officer at Netflix, Buzoma St. John. And they brought a lot of Black American people, some who were African American, some were African immigrants, and some were, the children or that came from immigrant families. And I think they were in Ghana, really Accra for about, I think Accra Cape Coast, maybe 10 to 14 days. And they were posting it all over their social media, and that really helped catapult Ghana in the Year of Return to the top. And Ghana was then named by CNN and other travel companies as one of the top 5 or top 10 places to visit in 2019. It was a very good, whether it was deliberate or not, it ended up being a very good marketing tool for the Year of Return. So what actually the Year of Return was, there's kind of some people weren't totally clear on it, and even the Ghanaian government itself wasn't totally clear on it either. So there's 2 definitions. And so from the first one, from the Year of Return website, said that the Year of Return was a major landmark spiritual and birthright journey, inviting the global African family back home to mark 400 years of the first enslaved Africans arriving in Jamestown, Virginia. But then when you go to the Visit Ghana website, which is managed by the Ghana Tourism Authority, they say that the Year of Return was a major marketing campaign targeting African American and diaspora market. So you can see, is it a spiritual coming home journey, or is Ghana just trying to make money? I guess it depends on who you ask. But the Year of Return, 2019, there were about 70 plus events that took place throughout the country for the Year of Return. I was there June to August, so I experienced some of them. But the main events happened in December. That's where we had like Afrochella, Afro Nation. Everybody, like lots of people were there. And yeah, those two concert events were the big events, but there was lots of other things that were going on in December as well, because December historically for people in the Ghanaian diaspora, that's just, because of Christmas and New Year's and all of that, that's when people go home. So it's now, December in Ghana, or Dete December as they call it, has now become institutionalized, and the Year of Return kind of capitalized on that. So some pros and cons of the year. Oh my gosh, technology. Pros and cons of the Year of Return. Some people who are for it felt that it strengthens Ghana's Pan-African legacy. They welcoming all the African diaspora back home, like Nkrumah did back in '57 when Ghana got its independence, and it's like reuniting Ghana's like Nkrumah's vision. People also felt that like it's good for the Ghanaian economy, and according to the tourism minister, $1.9 billion was generated from the Year of Return, which makes sense because people, if they're coming in, they're probably not coming for free. They have to pay for food, pay for airfare, pay for hotels and things of that nature. People also felt that the Year of Return was a good opportunity for Ghana to strengthen its relationships with other nations. So I know like the president traveled to Jamaica and to other countries during the Year of Return to promote it. And they also did some like visa exchanges, like I think with Barbados, if they wanted people from Barbados, if they want to go to Ghana, they don't need visas, and vice versa. So lots of things of that nature also took place during the Year of Return. And citizenship for people of the African diaspora, specifically like people from the Caribbean and people from African Americans from the US, were given citizenship during the Year of Return. So some of the critiques were that people weren't really clear on what it was. Like I said, even like the two definitions from two government institutions that were working on the Year of Return were very different. And people weren't also clear on who the target audience was. When I was in Ghana and I was talking with people from the African diaspora who had moved to Ghana, they felt that the Year of Return was for the Ghanaian diaspora. But then in talking with the Ghanaian diaspora, they felt that the Year of Return was for the African diaspora. So people, people weren't totally sure about like who it was for, but people were still going to the events and having a good time. So there's also that. And then another critique was that it was a capitalist endeavor with localized benefits, so people just feeling that the Ghanaian government was trying to capitalize on people's desire to create an emotional connection with the country their homeland that they've been separated from for generations, that they were just trying to profit off of that for their own economic benefit. And in addition to that, the money that came into the country was really just in the capital area, maybe into Cape Coast a bit, but it was really in Accra, in the greater Accra region, that a majority of the events were held, and that most of the money that was going to. So people felt that all the economic benefits that were supposed to be coming into the country were really only staying in one place. It wasn't the entire country that was benefiting. Another one is that, and related to that, is that the Year of Return ignores, the everyday Ghanaians, people who are just, trying to get to work, trying to, get to school, just trying to live their life. People felt that they were not, like their perspectives were not being included in the Year of Return. And also, especially in December, when people are coming in with their pounds and their dollars and all types of foreign currency, feeling that the people that are just living in Ghana trying to live their life would be put put off by that because the cost of living goes up because people are coming in with foreign currency. So taxi drivers are raising their prices. The people at the House of Cocoa sellers raising her prices. People are raising their prices, and that has a negative impact on the people that don't have access to foreign currency. So after the year of return, people were like, okay, Ghana, like this is cute. What's next? And their next thing is now Beyond the Return, which is a 10-year project under the theme A Decade of African Renaissance is supposed to last from 2020 to 2030. It's built on seven pillars: Experience Ghana, Invest in Ghana, Diaspora Pathways to Ghana, Celebrate Ghana, Brand Ghana, Give Back to Ghana, and Promote Pan-African Heritage and Innovation. But unfortunately, because of COVID, they really haven't been able to do much with that as of yet. They did have a launch event. The Ghana borders are open, so they had a launch event that people attended. People in Ghana could attend. The rest of us just watched online. So, and it seems like they've heard some of the criticism that was given from the year of return, especially around like the benefits of the year of return really just staying in across. So they're trying to do things in different parts of the country so that the economic benefit can be equally distributed throughout the country. But I think that is my time. So I'm going to end it there. And yeah, just what questions? Yeah, and does anyone have questions?
Thank you, appreciate it. There are a few questions. I'm going to scroll up and just call people out to ask those questions, if that's okay.
Okay. Can I stop sharing my screen so I can see?
No, keep it. We need motivation. Who's first? Chloe asked in terms of the reason why there was such an interest in the diaspora. And when even though I said money, she raised a question, says global warming. Chloe, could you expand on that?
Yeah, I read Bruno Latour's most recent book, and he was talking about the effects of global warming on migrations around the world and kind of how, just there's going to be a lot more people moving around the world, and it's going to be harder to really define like what a nation is anymore, or unless walls are, or more walls will be built. But it makes me think a lot about the connection between movements and peoples and like global warming.
That's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't.
Have you thought about that?
I haven't actually, but that does make sense. I don't know. I'm sure it's applicable in the Ghanaian context. I just haven't focused a lot on that, so that's something I probably have to look up. But yeah, I think that's a really interesting point.
Do you think there's potentially a preemptive migration, kind of like spring that is happening at this point, where people are jumping ship from other nations to move back to, let's say, quote unquote, let's say homelands, before the borders are closed? Yeah, do you think that there's something of that in there?
Oh, absolutely. People, and I think the year of return really ignited people's desire to. It's like a perfect storm of like the year of return, and then like all the people getting killed by police and all this stuff. And so Ghana's like, oh, you see how these people are treating you? Like, come to Ghana where you'll be appreciated, even though police brutality is most definitely a thing that is happening there. I don't know if anyone is paying attention as well to Nigeria and the NSARS. That's happening there as well. So, but yeah, people are getting tired of America and the UK and wherever else, and Ghana is positioning itself as a place that is easy to live, easy to do business, and so people are there's the return or reverse migration is most definitely happening.
Just on that note, there was a reference I would like to bring up. There's a series of 6 publications that's called Migration. It's an infographic design publication that's on sale. I'll find a specific link and I'll put it in the chat. But there's something to watch in regards to why people are moving, how they're moving, and the consequence of their emotion. So there was a narrative where there's an example of a gentleman called Mansa Musa, who traveled, and the way that he used to travel was that he was so wealthy that whenever he traveled, he changed the economic infrastructure of that space just off his movement alone, because he was that wealthy. So if you understand it on an individual level, of course, there's one thing that I'd like to add, but I'll ask this question first. Alana, are you here?
Yes, hello.
Hey, would you mind asking your trifecta of questions?
Yes. First of all, I'm so happy to be here as a VP, and I'm a dancer and choreographer, and my work deals with diasporic studies. I'm a child of immigrants. So I've been thinking about this a lot, and in your research, there's so many different definitions of diaspora, so I'm just curious what you think about this. Do you think that it has a link necessarily to some sort of conflict or being torn away by some sort of unfortunate circumstance from homeland? Like, I'm wondering, like, if you're a French person living abroad out of France, would that person consider themselves, provided they stayed close to the culture, as part of a French diaspora? Or do we have a Swedish, I'm in Minnesota, there's a lot of Scandinavian immigrants. Do we have a Swedish diaspora? So I really would love to know your opinion, or does it only fall on certain groups of people? Thank you.
So the first question about if there has to be like some type of like conflict or trauma to, you know, in the separation of people being removed from their homeland. I wouldn't say, I don't think so. I wouldn't say that it has to be. I mean, people leave or move around for all different types of reasons, but in the beginning, the definition I gave, that was from the two, Schaefer and Cohen, and their works that they gave, they, you know, for them, they mentioned that, you know, trauma doesn't have to be there, but sometimes, more often than not, honestly, it is. And trauma, I mean, and it is, yeah, it is a reason why people can move, but it's not, you know, some people, like, I moved for, you know, for school, and I, you know, it's only because of COVID that I'm back. I really don't have any intention of moving back to the United States. So yeah, so that's not, you know, I became an educational migrant. I just feel like I have more economic opportunities for the things I want to do in the UK. So you know, my personal experience wouldn't be one of trauma, but there are, you know, some groups, like you could say, like the African diaspora, traumatic experience. The Armenians are also another, in the Cohen book, he lists the Armenians as another group that's been as like a trauma diaspora as well. Now, as for like the term being applied to, you know, only certain groups, I think that again, like, probably depends on the group and how the government of the group sees themselves. So because of you know, Ghana being a part of, you know, its position within the African diaspora, they're starting to use the term diaspora. Would the French government call their citizens abroad diaspora? I don't know. They would probably just say French citizens abroad or something like that. And the same thing, like me being an American abroad, they don't say the American diaspora. They just say Americans abroad. So I think I think a big like factor into how groups see themselves and call themselves sometimes has to do a lot with how the government is calling them.
We have another question. Imran, would you like to express yourself?
Hello, thank you for the talk. It was really interesting. My question was, how do you think that they might address the critiques of the year of return for next time? But then I know that's quite a large thing, so I thought I should ask first, do you think it worked or works?
I mean, people came, even like my friends, my African-American friends who I went to school with, people like, it's almost like this person's in Ghana, that person's in Ghana, like she went to Nigeria before. So people were, I mean, it did work because, I mean, people like to travel now. So people went, it's like, oh, this African country is saying I can come and like, you know, be amongst my people. Like, of course I'm gonna come. And people came. And it seems that the people that came had a really good time. Like I said, like they said $1.9 billion were generated. So I think economically it worked. I think socioculturally it worked. I think it's smart on the part of the Ghanaian government to really, position itself as it's doing, as being like this, trying to like double down on its Pan-African legacy and really show itself as like a modern day home for all the Black people who are being impacted by racism and everything else in these Western countries. So yeah, and people are really interested in moving to Ghana or even exploring other parts of the African continent, which I don't think is a bad thing, but I do feel like there are, you know, like there are some, you know, people being pushed out of certain areas. I think there is a risk of almost like gentrification in a certain extent. I remember reading an article about the people who are Americans who are moving to Ghana, and they're saying like, oh, like the housing is so much, you know, they're building affordable housing here, but it's like, okay, affordable for who? Because I highly doubt, you know, the Trotro mate and the, you know, the cocoa seller, all these people can afford to live in the places that you are calling affordable. So I think there's still some, you know, come home, but like in a not a neo-colonial way is what I would like to, you know, advise people to do. But as for for next time, it is, you know, like I said, it seems like they're trying to, you know, have more events like throughout different parts of the country and not just have things focused on Accra. But, you know, it's early in the tenure, you know, this was the beginning of the first year, and you see how 2020 has gone. So they haven't even really had an opportunity to get things off the ground. So we're just gonna, you know, we have to wait and see how in 2030 we can all meet again. We can talk about how, you know, how the Beyond the Return initiative went.
Thank you.
There's another question. Well, actually, before there's a question, you mentioned that the idea of Ghanaians abroad voting was contentious. Could you expand on that just a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean, people want to do it. It's something that people abroad have been fighting for a while, and legally in Ghana, they have the right to. Like I said, the Supreme Court said that, you know, electoral people, you all need to make this thing happen. But it has not yet happened. And so people that want to vote are very frustrated by that, because, you know, some still have their Ghanaian citizenship. They might go to Ghana frequently, and they, you know, they're still involved in what goes on there. So they feel like, and they feel like they should have the right, and they do have the right, according to the Constitution and according to the Supreme Court, to vote. But for whatever reason, all the Ghanaian, you know, administrations that have come to power since then have not really moved to do that. And I think it's really surprising, actually, that it still hasn't been done, especially under this current administration, which is so diaspora friendly. And it's still, you know, the election is what was this, October? Like, so 2-3 months away. And the Ghanaians in the diaspora still probably won't be able to vote unless.
But why do you think that is? Why do you think there's a lack of movement or a hesitation or resistance?
Because, and this is why another reason why I said I'm surprised. Most people in the abroad, as we call it, are NPP supporters, and that's the government that's in power. And even they are, and NPP is also not moving their feet on this. And I feel like it's because they're not sure no one is really sure how the diaspora vote will like swing things, you know? And I think they want to be able to, you know, just still have some like relative control over like what, you know, the politics of the nation. So having people, and I think also there's an idea that people who live, I mean, they might come to Ghana to visit often, but they don't live there. So it's kind of like, why are you who you left, you know, why should you come and now have a say in like who's running the country when you don't live here? So I think that like those are like two possible reasons as to why. But like I'm really surprised as to like that the current administration has not. Yeah.
So it's like a conflict of ideals, but making decisions in an environment in which you don't feel the consequences.
Yeah.
So I think that's also something for people to keep in mind when it comes to the projects that they're developing in terms of the relationship between initiation and then ramifications. There was another statement from Eduardo. Would you like to elaborate?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you so much for the lecture. I think it was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this idea of nation that I recently, I halfway through the new book of Nandita Sharma that is called Home Rule, where she criticized the very idea of the construction of migrant or nation as a tool to divide society in, you know, migrants and native, and how that have been changing during the recent last years in a different. So the idea is like it's how we can talk about heritage or cultural heritage or belonging to a specific culture but at the same time trying to dilute, or if it is that what we want, or it will be operative or useful, the very definition of nation. Because for me, the Westphalian model of sovereignty is one of the main issues that we have to deal today in many, many different ways. Like Chloe was referring to climate change, but also migration, and both from my point of view are very, very connected in some way. And I think that the incapacity of the Westphalian model to deal with these issues it shows that maybe it should be abolished, and we maybe should move on to a new kind of definition of planetary that goes beyond the idea of nation itself.
Yeah, nations are made up. There's a book, I don't know if you've heard, it's called Imagine Communities by, and I forgot the author, Anderson something or other. It's very interesting. And reading it, I was like, wow, so we're all just here like, national pride, like their nations and culture, they're, yes, thank you, Benedict Anderson. I mean, they're made up. Even like looking at Ghana was like four different parts of different geographical areas that were kind of forced together because the British wanted the natural resources and the work of the people in them. And so now it's Ghana, and we wave the flag and all of that, and we care about, culture and stuff like that. But it's like, even within that, like the communities, I don't like to use the word tribe. So like the communities that exist within Ghana, each like within themselves operated, like we could say they were nations before colonization. They each had, distinct languages, cultures, religious practices, and things of that nature.
Empires.
Yeah, yes. That were then kind of like, thrown together in this thing called a nation and said, congratulations, work it out. and that's, and that is kind of why, like, certain groups in Ghana have a lot more political power. Certain languages are the ones that are on top. And so I guess in the ideal world, we can be, deconstruct nations and everyone can kind of go back to, how things were originally. That's just not, unfortunately, that's not the world that we live in. So it's just kind of like, how can we, I don't know, exist in nations maybe ethically? I'm not sure, even because there's, Kirstie, you have a question?
No. Finish your thought.
Okay. Yeah, just thinking about like, can we like not just go around like bombing other nations because they won't give us our resources, or like do we need to build walls and the borders and all these things like these? I mean, I don't have the answers to these questions. It's just like, things for us to, I guess, to think about for now, because that's what is a nation?
I think there's, I believe the University of the Underground ran a project that was called Post-Nation States that you should look at, which we ran prior to this, the New Politics and Afrofuturisms. I think you should have a look at the work that was developed there in order to see what each piece of work was exploring and the concepts that they were questioning. But there's also, while we're thinking on a nation level, you can also think on a much smaller context. For example, the idea of estates or projects, that just because you may cluster a group of people that may be in the same socioeconomic bracket. And then the question is, what are the devices and how they're supposed to get together? How do you